The summer heat pressed down on Milwaukee on July 22, 1991. The city's rhythm was ordinary, the kind of evening when people sat on their porches to catch a bit of air. Inside one downtown apartment building, though, a chain of events was about to begin that would expose a secret life no one could have imagined. A man named Tracy Edwards stumbled through the streets near the Oxford Apartments, panic in his eyes and a pair of metal handcuffs hanging from one wrist. Breathless, he flagged down a passing patrol car and begged for help. Officers Rolf Mueller and Robert Roth listened as he explained that he had been held against his will by someone named Jeffrey. He pointed back toward the building he had just escaped, to a small unit on the second floor, apartment 213. The officers followed Edwards to the building. The hallway was narrow and quiet, the air thick with a faint chemical smell that clung to the walls. When they reached the door of 213, they knocked. It opened to reveal a tall, pale man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of mild confusion. He spoke politely, almost softly, and invited them inside, insisting that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. At first glance the apartment seemed ordinary, a couch, a small table, a fish tank gurgling in the corner. Yet something about the place felt wrong. The officers sensed tension in the air, a stillness that made every sound seem amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of a light. While one officer kept an eye on the occupant, the other stepped toward a partially open bedroom door. A drawer on the bedside table was pulled out just enough to show the corner of a photograph inside. Acting on instinct, he opened it. What he saw froze him in place. The images inside were not art or decoration, they were evidence. The quiet politeness of the man in the doorway suddenly felt like a mask slipping away. The officer turned and called for backup. In a rush of movement, the calm facade shattered. The officers restrained the suspect and radioed for assistance. Within minutes, the building filled with detectives and forensic teams. What had begun as a simple disturbance call was quickly becoming one of the most significant arrests in the city's history. As neighbors gathered behind yellow police tape, the night air carried murmurs of disbelief. Some residents recognized the man being led away in handcuffs. They had exchanged polite hellos with him in the hallway, never suspecting anything unusual. Others recalled complaining about strange smells from his apartment, smells that had always been explained away as spoiled food or problems with plumbing. Now those excuses took on a new, chilling meaning. Back at police headquarters, the suspect, Jeffrey Dahmer, sat quietly in an interrogation room. He was calm, almost detached, answering questions with an even tone. Detectives who interviewed him later said his politeness made the conversation even more unsettling. He did not attempt to deny what he had done. He simply described it as if recounting a routine, his eyes steady, his voice steady. The officers listening realized they were hearing confessions that would take days to fully comprehend. Meanwhile, investigators remained inside the apartment through the night. Every surface was photographed, every object catalogued. The process was slow and methodical. Detectives opened drawers, cabinets, and closets, each discovery deepening the understanding that this small living space had been the center of a long and hidden pattern of crime. They found photographs, tools, and written notes. They found evidence that linked the occupant to numerous disappearances over the past several years. With each item logged, the scope of the case expanded. Outside, television crews began to arrive. The streetlights reflected off the lenses of cameras as reporters struggled to piece together information. None of them yet grasped the magnitude of what police were uncovering inside. For residents of Milwaukee, the Oxford Apartments had always blended into the background of city life. Tonight, they were a symbol of something unimaginable hidden behind ordinary walls. In the early hours of the morning, Detective Patrick Kennedy, one of the lead investigators, paused at the doorway of the apartment. The stillness inside felt almost oppressive. He later recalled the moment as one of quiet disbelief. How could so much darkness exist in a space that looked so unremarkable? To him, it represented the ultimate warning about appearances and the limits of intuition. By sunrise, the team had gathered boxes of evidence and transported them to the forensic lab. The number of victims being discussed in hushed tones among officers began to rise. It was clear that this was not the story of a single tragedy but of many lives lost. The task ahead, identifying victims, notifying families, building a case, felt overwhelming. At the same time, across the city, phones at the police department rang without pause. Families who had reported loved ones missing called again, asking if this arrest could finally explain what had happened. Detectives promised to review every record, every photo. For some families, answers would come. For others, the uncertainty would continue for weeks. News of the arrest spread fast. Television anchors repeated the suspect's name, while residents expressed disbelief that such a person could live among them unnoticed. Friends described him as quiet, shy, even gentle. A local woman who lived on the same floor told reporters that he often offered her sandwiches or helped carry groceries. The realization that she had spoken so casually with a man now accused of horrific crimes left her shaken. At the station, as interviews continued, Dahmer spoke with an eerie composure. Detectives asked him why he had continued for so long, why he had never sought help. His answers came slowly, punctuated by long silences. He said he had tried to stop but could not. He admitted he had been aware of the wrongness of his actions, yet he carried on. To the detectives in the room, it was a conversation that felt both human and completely alien. For the next several days, the Oxford apartments became the center of national attention. Crime scene vehicles filled the parking lot, and reporters crowded the sidewalks. Police officers worked in shifts to process evidence. The building's residents were relocated. Many never returned. The property itself would later be demolished, the city deciding that the shadow it cast was too heavy to remain standing. But on that first morning after the arrest, before the world knew the details, Milwaukee was still waking up to the realization that the quiet man next door had been hiding one of the darkest secrets in modern history. The shock rippled outward, from neighbors to families, from local reporters to national newsrooms. Everyone asked the same question: how could this have gone unnoticed for so long? As the sun rose over the crime scene tape, the detectives who had spent the night inside the apartment stepped outside for air. The morning was bright, almost jarringly peaceful. One officer later said that the warmth of the sunlight felt wrong, as though nature itself should have dimmed its light in respect for what had been discovered. They knew their work had only begun. The evidence collected that night would take weeks to analyze, and the interviews would continue for months. Each detail revealed more about the suspect's methodical habits and his attempts to appear ordinary. The investigation would ultimately lead to the identification of 17 victims and raise questions about law enforcement's handling of previous missing person cases. It would also prompt national conversations about community vigilance, policing, and the importance of listening to small signs that something might be wrong. By the time evening fell again on July 23rd, reporters from around the country had descended on the scene. Camera flashes lit the street as officers carried out sealed evidence boxes. For residents watching from nearby buildings, the flashing lights felt endless, as though the city itself was refusing to let the darkness fade quietly away. Inside the precinct, Detective Kennedy prepared his preliminary report. He summarized the timeline, listed the recovered evidence, and noted that the suspect had been fully cooperative. In his final line he wrote, simply, "This case will define the city for years to come." He was right. The arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer marked the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. The slow, painful process of uncovering everything that had been hidden behind the closed door of apartment 213. For the officers involved, for the families of the victims, and for the people of Milwaukee, the events of that night would never be forgotten. Back at the Milwaukee Police Department, the night stretched into dawn as Jeffrey Dahmer sat quietly in an interview room. The world outside had no idea what was unfolding inside that building. Investigators moved carefully, collecting evidence, photographing each item brought from his apartment, and labeling them with the precision required in a case that would soon become one of the most shocking in American history. The calm in Dahmer's eyes puzzled detectives. They expected resistance or denial, but instead they were met with an eerie composure. He spoke slowly, answering questions with unsettling clarity. As the hours passed, the magnitude of his actions came into focus. Detectives compared the evidence found inside the apartment to missing person reports. Each item matched a name, a face, and a grieving family. What began as a routine arrest for assault had turned into the unraveling of years of hidden crimes. Dahmer's words carried a disturbing calm, as if he were describing someone else's life. The investigators listened carefully, documenting every sentence, aware that what they were hearing would soon shake the nation. When the confession tapes were replayed later, they revealed a man trying to explain himself, to find meaning in something without any logic. He spoke of loneliness, control, and fear of abandonment. There were no dramatic outbursts or signs of remorse, just a quiet, unnerving acceptance of what he had done. The officers left the room in silence, each one processing the reality that they had been sitting across from a man whose crimes defied understanding. News of Dahmer's arrest spread quickly across Milwaukee. Reporters crowded around the police station, their microphones raised high as officials gave short, controlled statements. No one wanted to believe the early rumors, yet the truth soon came out in the following days. Residents of the Oxford apartments watched as police trucks arrived to remove boxes of evidence. The building, once ordinary, had become a symbol of horror. People who lived nearby remembered faint smells, strange noises, and brief encounters that now took on new meaning. Families of missing men began calling the station, desperate for answers. Some had been waiting for years, hoping their loved ones would come home. For them, Dahmer's arrest was both a relief and a heartbreak. The relief came from knowing what happened. The heartbreak came from realizing the unimaginable had been true all along. Inside the police department, officers continued sorting through evidence for days. Each discovery deepened the sense of disbelief. Prosecutors began preparing for what they knew would be a trial unlike any other. Psychiatric experts were called in to understand how a man like Dahmer could live an ordinary life by day and commit unimaginable acts in secret. His calm demeanor in court later only added to the public's confusion. People debated whether he was sane or not, evil or sick. The question had no easy answer. The media turned the case into national headlines. Talk shows, newspapers, and documentaries dissected every detail. The name Jeffrey Dahmer became synonymous with darkness, and his apartment number, 213, became a reference point for fear. Yet behind the sensational coverage were the quiet stories of the victims. Friends and families tried to bring attention back to the people whose lives were lost. They shared photos, memories, and moments that reminded the world these were not just names in a headline but sons, brothers, and friends. As months passed, Dahmer's trial began. The courtroom was filled every day, with reporters in every seat. The proceedings were tense but orderly. Dahmer pleaded guilty, admitting to everything. When he addressed the court, his words were simple. He said he hoped his death would bring peace to the families. But for most, peace did not come easily. The scars of what had been uncovered would linger for years. After his sentencing, the Oxford apartments were eventually demolished. Residents who had lived there could no longer bear the memories attached to the building. The empty lot that replaced it became a quiet reminder of what once stood there. For Milwaukee, the case forced hard questions about loneliness, mental health, and how evil can hide in plain sight. Over time, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer became a case study in criminal psychology and law enforcement. It taught investigators about the importance of follow-up in missing person cases and how seemingly minor clues could prevent years of tragedy. His name remained in history books and documentaries, but for those who survived him, the neighbors, the families, and the officers who walked into that apartment, he was not a myth or a mystery. He was a reminder that monsters often look ordinary until the mask finally slips. Even decades later, people still speak about the night it all ended. For many, it represents the fragile boundary between normal life and hidden darkness. The apartment no longer exists, but the story lives on through the lessons learned and the memories preserved. Inside Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, the truth of what people are capable of was laid bare, not through what was found, but through the quiet shock that followed. It changed how a city viewed safety, how families trusted, and how investigators approached every future case that seemed too strange to be true. As the camera would fade out in your video, the final lines could linger on that feeling, a city haunted not by the crimes themselves, but by the reminder that even the calmest faces can hide the darkest secrets. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer ends where awareness begins, and that awareness continues to echo long after the apartment was gone.